there's something messed up going on right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so now again, the most important. This whole thing has been a ruse for me to get to this question. And this one is: do you like cheese? And if yes, which ones and why? And if no, why are you such a horrible person? Yeah.
Oh my God. Obviously I love cheese. I think the one that comes to mind for me immediately, because there's such a natural and effortless pairing that goes with it, is Comté. It's a cheese that comes from an area in France called the Jura. And they make this very famous style of wine called vin jaune, which means yellow wine. And it's that color, obviously, for different reasons, but it's a process where they allow a layer of yeast to develop over top of the must, and they call it sous voile. And it just makes this very bewitching, very unusual, but like really addictive style of wine. It's nutty and oxidative, and like with that cheese, which is also very like nutty in style. It's, oh my God, it's like it's a match made in heaven. And then probably second would be Saint-Agur blue cheese with there's this style of wine from southern France in Languedoc-Roussillon. It's like a dessert style red, and just with like the unctuous, I can't remember. It's like not vin de soif. It's help me, Stephen. What's the?
I know what you're talking about, but I'm trying.
The producer's called Rive Salt, and it's just like a dessert style wine. I can't think of the name. Anyways, it doesn't matter. But that with blue cheese is like to die for. And then probably lastly would be, I know you didn't ask me for 3, but I'm going to give you 3. I could probably give you more.
No,
go ahead.
We could do another 2 hours. We could do another 2 hours on this if you want. Like
Oh, okay. Manchego. I just love Manchego. With pretty much any Spanish wine. Cava is just like an effortless pairing because it's just so quaffable. Goat cheese, just by virtue of its like earthiness, pairs really, really beautifully with Pinot Noir, because Pinot Noir tends to be like a really earthy kind of like style of wine as well. Oh my God, like there's so many. I just love cheese so much.
That's interesting. I hadn't heard of goat cheese with Pinot Noir. I want to try that now. I typically do Pinot Noir with like pork or duck or something. I mean, it makes sense.
An amazing pairing if you take like a little canapé and do like a roasted beet and goat cheese and then have it with Pinot. It's so good. And it brings out all like the savory kind of like aspect. Yeah. I'm just like, I'm like a hedonist at heart. It's just like, give me all the pleasure in all its various forms.
We'll have those wines up on the screen as you're listening, so you can definitely check this out. What is the whole pairing? You know, the historical pairing, like wine and cheese. Is it just because it has a history of like being with like royalty? It was something that people were having. Like, what is that whole wine and cheese thing together?
I don't know. Do you know, Stephen?
That's actually a good question. Now I feel like I should know, but it's one of those things you just take for granted. Nobody really says. I mean, I'm probably going to look it up now, but
yeah.
And because I'm saying that's probably part of why people will look at your job and they think like, oh, there's something about wine that's different. If you were like, okay, I'm in the beer industry or even the liquor industry, I think fewer people might just think that, oh, this person must be wealthy. There's something about wine that has that class kind of aspect to it. I'm not necessarily sure quite that. Yeah.
It has that romanticism.
Yeah.
Maybe it's like it has to do with like breaking bread at the table. Like there's some like religious context there. It's like kind of entrenched and ingrained in like royalty. There's sort of like this regal sort of umbrella and mysticism. And yeah, there's a whole host of different reasons for why, I think.
Oh yeah, I'm reading here too. They say it has a lot to just do with what's like big in those regions. So it's like you produce a certain cheese in that region, you produce a wine in that region. It was commonly paired with that. But then I guess over time people figured out, well, this wine from this region works better with this cheese from this region, and it just sort of expanded from that. Because I think of like you think about like Bordeaux, like, you know, the famous Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc, Merlot. That's typically paired with red meat. So there's like things like that, or like or like. In the South, you have like, you know, Provence, some of those rosés you have with like the lighter stuff. So they're just sort of adapting based on, you know, probably the climate and what food's available in each region and all that.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's like a very good general rule of thumb for food pairing. Yeah. It's just drink the local wine, the local food.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Speaking with the wine as well, this is a bit back to the previous question. You mentioned about things to learn. Like when it comes to the palate and the tasting, is that something you can develop before? Do you feel there's an aspect of it you personally or other people who, I mean, this, like we said, there's capacity and there's equity and there's capacity and ability where some people might just not have taste buds, but are there certain things that people can do to improve their ability to taste different kinds of wines that you've done or you've seen other people do?
Oh, for sure. Like our palate and our olfactory, they're both muscles. So the more that you use them, the more you're going to develop the ability to assess wines, right? And what I tell people all the time is smell absolutely everything, especially when you're at the grocery store, just to sort of catalog and like build your own little encyclopedia within your mind so that when you smell a certain wine where you know that Pinot Noir from like this specific region is going to smell like XYZ. And like that might vary from person to person because we all have different points of reference. And that's why I sort of like love, but I also hate tasting notes because what might be relevant to someone where they might describe it as brambleberry. And it's like, well, I don't know what brambleberry smells like. Or you might, in Kenya, there's probably tons of fruit that I've never smelt or tasted before. So you might describe a wine as something like that. And I might be like, I don't know what that means. Right. And so there was this really interesting book actually that was written by an MW, a master of wine. His name is Nick Jackson, called, I can't remember what the name of the book is actually, but he kind of turned the whole approach to tasting on its head. And instead of assessing like aromas or flavors, he talks about the wine in terms of shapes and structures. So Chenin Blanc, he describes the acidity as a crescendo. So when you're tasting blind and a lot of these exams, if the acid just continues to build and build and build and build and build, you're like, okay, there's a pretty good chance it might be Chenin Blanc. And then it's just like sort of that like process of deduction. And so like, I thought that was really cool. And there's a lot of people who've been in the industry, like even as long as I have or longer, and you sort of think that you've figured it all out. And so when people, well, you were saying that too recently, Stephen, like it's hard to come up with new ideas. So when like a new idea like that is presented, I think it's, I don't know, it's transcendent. It's like, okay, that actually makes my life a hell of a lot easier than just trying to figure out, oh, okay, I smelled blackberry. Now what could this be? Right. So, and it's just practice. Like I still feel like a neophyte when I'm tasting wine. Most of the time I'm like, is what I'm tasting accurate? Am I right? And it's like, it always comes back to just sort of like trusting your intuition and like that first thought that comes to mind. And I remember a winemaker told me ages ago, he was like, you should know within the first like 5 seconds of tasting something if you like it or not. Otherwise it's just going to be this like, process of just convincing yourself that it's something that it might not be. Like you're not going to find complexity where there is none and vice versa. Right. So
I was gonna say, I don't know what you were taught, Laura, but the way I was taught in school with tasting wine is think of a very broad category and keep narrowing it down. So think like fruit, and then like, okay, is it like berries? Is it stone fruit? Is it apple pear family? And then narrow it down from that. It's like, okay, is it like dark or red berries? Okay, dark berries. Are they fresh or dry or candied? And then you just keep narrowing it down from that. That helped me a lot because like you start with a very broad category and then just keep narrowing. And you're like, okay, now that's
yeah, totally. Yep. Same. Yeah.
Okay. One last on this food topic. Is there why is wine grapes? Like, why not other fruits or other fruits to make wine? Like, why is it like, I know like potatoes, it's like vodka. Okay. But can you make vodka out of other tubers? So with wine, is there other things where you think like, okay, this is competitive enough to what typical wine with grapes is, but it's not made out of grapes, something else entirely?
I mean, I've tried a whole host of different types of fruit wine, but I don't know, maybe because people just haven't excelled at it or devoted enough time or investment into really like honing it into something that's worthwhile taking notice of. Mm-hmm. But personally, no, I don't know. Maybe it goes back to that romanticism and that mysticism about planting vines. And I mean, I've tried all like cherry wine and blueberry wine and all that, but I think it's like the clusters and the stems and the seeds and like it's all these different sort of components at play that make this very magical product. And I don't know, I probably sound like I'm in a cult or something, but I don't know. I've tried so many fruit wines that are just gross. And I'm not convinced that they could bear the same result that grapes can for whatever reason. It's another thing I need to look up now too.
I think it might just be the composition of the fruit, like maybe because like the tannins, like I mean I know tannins are in other things too, but maybe like a certain percentage of sugar to tannin ratio. I'm trying to think of what else. I'm trying to think of like what else you would say, but like there's certain characteristics about the fruit itself that I think makes it better. That's why I can't remember all the terms off the top of my head, but yeah.
Because
and all the sheer varieties of grapes as well too.
Yeah.
Because we've had these conversations, Stephen, talking about cheese. We really like cheese. We're talking about like different kinds of cheese. There's a lactose and like, cheese for people who are lactose
intolerant.
Lactose intolerant. Like they have the type A milk where they take out some aspect of the milk, the lactase in that. So there might be ways to do that. And they also have the impossible meats and things like that. We're getting soon to the point where we'll have like replicators, where technically you might be able to just get basic elements of things and then recombine them into whatever wine is. So there'll be ways to ostensibly take out the actual grape aspect and insert whatever you want into there. That's just something that's kind of interesting to why certain foods come together in certain ways and why others can't do that same kind of thing.
Sure. I was just gonna say, Laura is also a very big fan of mortadella. If you follow her page, you'll see her posting a lot of it.
Yeah, so we'll do that. We'll have the links there below.
Are you on Instagram, Silas?
Yeah. It's Anuma Solis. So I'll send you like, while we're still on the topic, what's the wine that you're drinking?
Oh, so this is from Prince Edward County, which is about 3 hours kind of like northeast of Toronto. And like I said, it's kind of like this little island that is like a bedrock of limestone with like very specific little hot pockets that they can ripen certain varieties. And this is owned by a mother-daughter team. And they have had, I think, like something in the neighborhood of like 100 acres in their family for several generations now. And they are able to kind of leave some of the land fallow, which draws away certain pests or predators. So they're farming as holistically as they can. And then they're just doing a lot of like fun and funky stuff. So this is actually a blend of Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. And so to some people that might come across as weird. It's not that weird, but like Champagne is a blend of white and red varieties as well, which maybe like a newbie would not know. And yeah, it's just it's very savory. And what I've kind of like come to learn in my journey, now that I've been tasting wine for as long as I have, I really just want to taste the fruit. And a lot of wine is masked through the use of oak and various additives and, you know, just to create that homogeneous product along the lines of what I was talking about earlier. But yeah, I just want to taste like what that fruit presents itself as from that specific area. And you just really seek out like purity and like simplicity. And so this with like cheese or mortadella, obviously, but something like tomato based, because it's so savory. Like it reminds me of almost like ketchup chips or something. Like I was eating those, you know, those like oversized like Italian beans that are like marinated in like the Italian sauce or tomato sauce.
Yeah.
I actually was serving this wine with those last night, and it was just like a match made in heaven, because there's like almost like a tomato leaf vibe, but then also like an orange zest thing kind of like going on. And yeah, it's just really interesting. So yeah, that's what I'm drinking.
Cool.
Yeah. Anything else on the cheese, Stephen?
No, I mean, that could be a whole discussion in of itself, but it's like, yeah. Good answer.
Okay, so now on to the last question of the main ones before we get to the last three. And again, thank you very, very much for this. Has been an excellent conversation. Is there anything else you want to add about this, like with like what you do, like the earnings, cost benefit analysis, trade-offs? One of the questions we like asking here are relationships. Like you mentioned, you've met people in the industry, and I think that's in part due to, I think, you liking something that you're doing. You're probably going to meet people who chose to do that as well and find some kind of appreciation in it. But just maybe cost benefit analyses with relationships. Like, how often do you actually interact with people? What are things that you think you've lost out on or you've traded off on because of the things that you do? You can't also do these other things.
I mean, definitely what I do, it's lifestyle first and foremost. I'm trading off for probably a better paying role elsewhere for some 6-figure marketing job with some big like wine corporation. But I would not trade what I do anything. Cause it's like what I have that a lot of people don't is time to build those relationships. Like that would be the number one thing that I do is interact with people. I'm very accessible. And I want to be, because I want to learn from my followers and try and garner understanding for like what they're about. And that attitude has really shifted for me as of late, where I used to sort of like, maybe I was a bit arrogant or positioned myself as like above other people. And it's like, no, it's like I can learn just as much from the consumers that I pour wine for, or the followers who reach out to me on Instagram, just as much as they can learn from me, and make it this just exchange of information. And it's become this thing that I'm on like this perpetual quest for. And yeah, sometimes I would obviously love to like make more money, but that's all up to me as well. Like I'm definitely a procrastinator. I'm prone to laziness. But even within that, I'm very, very lucky. Like even when I was going to BC, my boyfriend was like, oh, to live the life of Laura, like just gallivanting around. Like I'm very lucky, like the lifestyle that I get to live. Obviously I want to travel again. And that's going to be like, you know, subject to like what the hell goes on with COVID and everything like that. I really miss traveling. Oh, that was something that I just loved doing. Like right before COVID, like in 2019, I went to India for 2 months. And then like a couple months later, I was in Slovenia and Northern Italy, and then moved to Toronto, and I was going all over Niagara. And it was one of the most transformative years like of my life. Like the people that you meet and the things you learn and the food you get to eat and the wines you get to taste. And it enriches your soul. Like, I just love traveling so much. And it sounds like such a lame, like basic bitch thing to say, but it's like, I'm not going to like, you know, an all-inclusive in Mexico or something like that. I'm going to like weird places that most people would not go to like really learn and garner an understanding. And along the lines of like what you were saying earlier, Silas, about like globalization, like, I don't like that the world is going in that direction, because I think that we really need to preserve like local traditions and history and stuff like that. But it's really cool to go and be like a witness of how other people live their lives. So that was another big tangent.
That's all right.
Yeah, no, getting to the end of this, but still some connection issues. So right here, I was just making the case for communication is a key thing. Understanding people is a key thing. So when someone says, I want to have at least one language, that says nothing about other languages, but it's good to have at least one that you can communicate across, like you can have some kind of understanding with. I think that's part of why I'm seeing with the whole globalization aspect.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening. This has been a clip from an actual longer recording that I'll try to leave a link to on the screen or somewhere around here where you're listening to this.
Presents. 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 Presents.
Peasants.
Okay. Okay.